morning, everyone. I am always thrilled for anyone to give me any amount of time to talk about soil. I know it won't make sense on the video, but I just wanted to reiterate what Garrett said. As the person who hired Garrett to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, I can tell you that his experience with Envirothon let him, as a freshman coming into Oregon State University, have a level of poise that was outcompeted just about everybody on the panel, including PhD candidates. So it's a lot of soft skills that you get with these things besides just the technical. And as an employer, I really appreciate that. It was something that Envirothon provides. Besides that, let's talk about soil. So I'm excited about soil. I'm a soil scientist. I work for NRCS. How many of you guys know who NRCS is? A few of you guys? Okay, so how many of you guys are familiar with Bureau of Land Management or Forest Service? More folks in the room? How about ODF, right? Oregon Department of Forestry? Okay, so all of those agencies, state and federal, they manage lands. So Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, they manage public lands. ODF manages public lands and some private lands. What the NRCS does is we do private land conservation. So we work with farmers, ranchers, and foresters across the nation and help them, do conservation work on their private lands. And one big element of that is soils. Our history as an organization came out of the Dust Bowl and Soil Erosion Service, and then we became the Soil Conservation Service, and then later, when recognizing that our mission was much more broad, we became the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But I have stayed true to our core values of soil. And I have the opportunity to talk to you guys today about what soil is, how soils function, how awesome soil aggregates are. You will have a new appreciation of the amazingness thing that is a soil aggregate. Then principles of healthy soils, wrap up in questions. And I have had a chance to breeze through some of the key points in the discussion in the book. And I'm hoping that the things that I touch on, it's not going to be linear, but there's going to be elements of what I'm talking about that's going to capture different parts of that soil and water conservation aspects of your key points for the Envirothon. So I'm just going to launch right in. What is soil, right? And this is the part, I should say, teachers are my most intimidating audience. I teach across the state to farmers, ranchers, like I said, high school students. Yesterday I was at Women in Sustainability. More intimidating that crowd because you do this all the time and I just do it on the side. So this is like the worst thing to do, right? Put a PowerPoint up there with a bunch of words. So soil is a natural body comprised of solids, minerals, organic matter, liquids, and gases that occurs on the land's surface. I like to get the technical definition out of the way because then we can have the fun definition. Another way people have talked about soil is that it's the unconsolidated mineral or organic material on the immediate surface of the earth that serves as the natural medium for the growth of land plants, right? So there's books that call it the ecstatic skin of the earth, right? It is that very, very, very narrow zone between where the atmosphere stops and where geology starts, which is where soil happens. Do you have a question?
A question about that. Can it be soil without the organic material?
No, that's geology. So soils have functioning soils that are growing plants. That's one of the definitions of soils, is it's actually growing a plant. That implies that there's biology. So if you imagine Mount Hood and the scree slopes at the top, where it's just rock and ice, on a soil map, we would draw a line around that and we would call it scree slope. Good question. All right, so like I just said, it's not just a pile of rocks. It has organic matter, it has life in it, it is growing things, maybe just little films of things like biological crusts in the rangelands, but it's still something that has happened in there that's biological. So this is the 4 basic components of soil. This is a classic soil science info. You're going to have your minerals, your air and your water, and your organic matter. So minerals are kind of that skeleton in the soil, right? So they're the sand, silt, and clay. Yep.
Just a minute, that's only 3. Organic matter, minerals, and
air and or water. Yep, so there's good point. So I'm sure you guys will run across the textural triangle. This is the percentage of sand, silt, and clay that you find in the soil. And depending on the different ratios of those three size fractions, and really all they are is size fractions, you will get a lot of different properties based just on those physical size fractions. And then above, of course, sand, you have we have gravels and cobbles and stones and flagstones. I mean, the whole way that we describe soils is very, very in depth. So this is these are your minerals. I like to think of them as kind of the skeleton, the structure, the skeleton of the soil, the support structure. Then you have your organic matter. So organic matter, though typically the least percentage of the whole, is the most complex, and it's actually the least understood. So soil organic matter is these humic acids, it's the living things, it's the dead things, it's the really, really dead stuff, right? That's in soil, and it's all these organic compounds that kind of just get decomposed, and they're super complex structures, but they're very active. They have a lot of by active I mean there's a lot of chemical activity on those organic matter complexes. And so those, in this idealized version of soil, you have about 5% organic matter. Depending on where you are in Oregon, it's nice I can frame us in the Oregon context. Here in our forest soils, you're gonna have forest people in 9, 10 on the coast % organic matter. Willamette Valley ag soils will have a natural level of about 6. You go to the desert and you're happy if you've got 2 or 3, depending on the texture and stuff. So big range. And then of course you have air and water, and the ratio of air to water is all dependent on the last time we had a precipitation event, right? So you have typically you have pores, so you have big pores, little pores, teeny tiny pores, and that proportion of air and water is changing daily, really, in the soil. So those are the 4 key components. Good to know when you're starting to talk about how soils fit together and the structure of them. And what I like to say is that these 4 things, though we can easily put them into boxes, they're elegantly complicated, and I'll show that more later when I talk about how those 4 parts of the soil come together to actually make an ecosystem. So one of the things that I was asked to speak about is some of the basic physical properties of soils, because this is one of the things that's going to lead into when Dean talks about soil taxonomy. So when we talk about just soil in general, there's a lot of ways you can approach it. My classical training is in why soils are where they are and why they look like they look, which is what are those properties that you can see and touch and smell and feel, and then of course take to the lab and test to help you understand what that soil is and then name it. So some of the basic physical properties of soil are its color, right? Super simple, soil color. And we have 3 soils here that kind of go from dark to light, and typically the darker a soil is, the more organic matter it is, the more fertile it's going to be. And as you go to a lighter color, so imagine this is a beautiful woodburn soil here in the Willamette Valley, and this is maybe I'm drawing a blank on it, Eastern Oregon soil. What's the name of an Eastern? Walla Walla. There you go, Walla Walla. Or I was going to think the biscuit scab soils over there. But so they're bake oven. There you go. So these are soils that are lighter in color. They just have, because of whatever properties that Dean will go into, haven't developed as much organic matter, so they're more erodible. And then that, just looking at the soil color, and we actually have very, it seems unprecise, but pretty precise ways in which we match soil colors to definite code, and then we can classify soils on color. The other one is soil structure. I know this is specifically in your materials. So soil structure is how that organic matter and those minerals come together and are physically exist in the soil profile. And so typically in an A horizon or the top soil, you're going to have nice granular structure. That's what you're going for. It's kind of like grape nuts. You can take a handful out and you can shake off the loose stuff, and you actually see little nuggets of soil that are together. And then, water moves through that pretty well. Then as you go down in the soil, you might have blocky structure, which is where soils are kind of in bigger chunks, but still have those, interstitial spaces around them. So in a typical silt loam soil, you would have granular going into like a blocky structure. And then Jory soil, our state soil, which is the really red soil that you see around the foothills of the Cascades and of the Coast Range. You have in the lower soil profile, you have prismatic structure, which is where the minerals have actually aligned. Think of the columnar basalt that you see if you drive through the gorge. The soil structure will actually form kind of those same similar columnars in profile that if you took your shovel and you scraped the top of it, you would actually see the edges of these prisms in there. So water's still gonna move down those paths. When you get to the beach, obviously, or river floodplains, you're going to have single grain sandy structure. And then depending on either genetic development or with management, what happens if it's genetic development, maybe you had a clay deposit over, there was a flood or something, so you had a clay deposit, and so you end up with like a real massive structure. So obviously, here we have lots of raindrops coming out of the bottom of these, and like one little raindrop coming out of this, because there's not as much room for the water to get through. This can also form, if you guys have probably heard of plow pans, right? So soils that have plow pans will have a massive structure. Now, platy structure is the same thing. It can form either genetically or with traction, equipment, vehicle traffic. Now, I was in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, teaching soil health to a national course, and they were hilarious. They're like, "Corey, go in the soil pit," and I look, and there's this like gorgeous platy structure, and I looked, I'm like, is this genetic? Right, because I had never seen genetic, and I was like taking pictures and like posting, and they're like, the whole tour moved to the next pit, and they're like, where'd Corey go? And I'm like still in the soil, like picking it apart and seeing the roots. It was amazing, because I'd only see platy structure because of like plow pans where like the roots stop and they don't go anywhere. But in this genetic platy structure, it was like there's enough fluffy space in there that the root would go down, go like an inch, find a crack, go down. So it was like this like matrix of roots down this platy structure, and I could have spent the whole afternoon, but they're finally like, Corey, we got to move on. But it was one of the coolest things, and it was so funny because as the other state soil scientist there, he was like, yeah, we thought it was pretty cool too. It was just so awesome. It was in this till soil, I don't know. So soil texture, talk about this a little bit more. I don't know, are they going to have to do soil texturing? Okay, so this is good to talk about. There's a lot of resources on the internet about little charts, flow charts for how to do soil texture. The trick is to know that you only need to estimate the clay and the sand to be able to figure out where you're going to land on this triangle. And knowing what your texture is going to talk a lot about how well air and water move through your soil, what kind of structure your soil is going to have, what kind of root limiting, if there's any root limiting layers. That kind of stuff is all based on structure or on texture, and texture actually is a driver when we talk about soil taxonomy. How the clay percentage changes down a soil profile keys into soil taxonomy as well. So without going through a flowchart exercise now, just sandy in this corner, clay in this corner, silt over here. Most ag soils, most of the stuff we live in is like kind of right here. And then of course, typically as you go deeper into soil, you'll get more clay. Unless you're, depending on your landscape position, if you're like next to a river, you might have bands of silt and then sand and then silt and then sand because of different river deposits. So knowing soil texture and be able to see how texture is changing down the soil profile can tell a lot about the story of that soil, how it came to be there, what different factors are affecting it, and then what's its genetic history, how old it is, that kind of stuff. We often have abrupt textural, we actually call them technically abrupt textural changes that can show where maybe you have a different formation process and then something happened geologically where you had a new formation process on top and you actually have two separate soils that are just on top of each other but not connected through time. Mm-hmm.
Can you please explain the term genetic?
Yes.
I don't understand.
Right, so I apologize, good question. So when I talk about genetic soil formation, I mean just like we grow and develop, soils grow and develop, and we call it genetic, meaning that it was not a disturbance activity. So it happened naturally. So a genetic platy structure means that it's there because the minerals in that soil formed in that structure, whereas a platy structure from a tractor is there because of human interference.
Thank you.
It's just one of our funny ways that we use lots of words, and you'll get that a lot when we talk about taxonomy, if you've looked at our soil taxonomy yet. All right, so depth classes and restrictions. These are really important soil physical properties, something that you can see when you are looking at soil profiles or looking at soil maps. It's something that will be keyed in on taxonomy. So here we have two soil profiles. This is silt loam, Willamette Valley soil, and a very kind of boring soil. It's just brown from the top to the bottom. Not a lot of difference. Nothing really going to prevent a root from growing in that soil. It's not going to have a lot of interpretations that would say that you need to manage for anything specific in that soil. But here we have a soil with layers, and I have to use the codes because see this band right here? That is it means, so it's a brown soil going to a light brown soil, and then it goes to a grayish white soil, and then to a heavy, all these codes right here mean that this is a very, very heavy fragipan soil. A fragipan soil is a layer in the soil that is kind of cemented by different minerals, and what that means is that the water comes down here, it hits the top of that fragipan, and it won't go down anymore. And so it's all this E horizon means that all the iron, the soil and color in soil is from the iron minerals that coat clay. So most soil is silica, which is like beach sand color, but iron oxides coat that and give it the brown and orangey colors. And so since the water is sitting here, that iron oxide is dissolving in the water and it's actually washing away, and you're getting the gray mineral colors coming out, which is this E horizon. So here's what this is saying, if you're looking at the soil profile, is that the roots are going to go there and they're going to stop, right? So from a management perspective, these plants only have this much of the profile that they can really tap into to get their water and their nutrients, whereas these plants would have the whole depth of the soil. Obviously, this is pretty high level stuff, but this is just kind of trying to set the stage for further investigation that you'll need to do with your students, understanding depth classes and restrictions in soils, and then where to get this information, which is what Dean's going to talk about. And then, of course, some of this information is going to be coded in the soil taxonomy that Dean is going to talk about.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
What is a common reason for that to happen? Is it like human influence? Is it irrigation? Is it like, what is?
Fragipans are controversial. Yes, we have fragipans in the West Hills of Portland. It's a little bit of a side. How many of you guys have heard of the Missoula floods?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody? Okay, whew. That would have been 15 minutes. So if you imagine Portland and the water crashing in, there was so much dust in the air. We call it loess. And that got plastered on those hills that were higher than the floodwaters. And it's very silty. Fragipans tend to form in silty soils. But the exact climatic reasons, is it a pressure thing? Is it a mineralogy thing? Is it like the sweet spot in climate where the minerals are weathering to a certain point, where they do this kind of welding together? And fragipans tend to be ephemeral. Like I could go out to a Powell soil or a Cascade soil on a really wet day and dig through and not feel it, but then I could go out 2 months later when it's dried up and things have kind of tightened up, and then boom, there's the fragipan. So I wish I could do a better job. There's people's careers on fragipans and how they developed in different parts of the country on different paramaterials. It's interesting. It's easier to explain something called durapan, which we get in Eastern Oregon, and those are silica cemented soils. Boom, done. Silica cemented layers. When you're driving through pretty much anything east of the Cascades and you see those road cuts where there's like the soil and then there's like that white layer that sticks out and then stuff's eroded below it, but that white layer is sticking out further than anything, you're like, why does it do that? Well, that's a durapan when you see those on those road cuts. And it's because silica has cemented those, and silica is not really soluble. Okay, drainage class. Working primarily most of my career in the Willamette Valley, soil drainage class is probably the #1 soil property that land managers need to consider. And on the east side, drainage class is also important for the opposite reason. In the Willamette Valley, we have soils that end up too wet. And on the east side, you have soils that are drouthy, so they're draining too fast. So soils have natural based on landform position and texture and the precip and the climate, have a natural drainage class. And that is going to be probably one of the #1 drivers of what can grow there. And then as a land manager, what you can do to either build organic matter to keep more water in the soil, or do this fun thing called installing drainage tile. Who knows what drainage tile is? Everybody know what drainage? Quick answer, it is a plastic perforated pipe that they bury 3 to 4 feet under the ground, and it pulls that water table down and out of the root zone. I don't know if you'll talk about it, but that's also how you drain wetlands, right? So that's can sometimes be a regulatory issue with piping, but also a really effective agronomic, option. So drainage class you can see in soils because you'll have very special color patterns in soils based on their drainage class. And that goes back to the whole part of the iron. Hey, when I'm out with producers and I explain to them how redoxamorphic features form, I say, hey, it's high school biology time, and I'm in a room full of high school biology teachers, so you can tell me if I say it right. But you remember, we are aerobic respirers, right? We use oxygen as the final electron acceptor on our electron transport chain. Well, microorganisms, when the soil is full of water, all the oxygen gets used up, and they use a scale of final electron acceptors in their respiration. So the bacteria go from being aerobic to anaerobic, and the first thing that the anaerobic bacteria use up is nitrogen. So they use nitrogen as their final electron acceptor, and that goes off as gas, N2 gas. And then you have manganese. They'll use manganese as their final electron acceptor, and that's where you get these black dots. Can you see like the black in there? So the manganese will go from manganese 3+ to 4+. It'll dissolve and go into solution, and then when that water drains out, it'll pop out of solution. And after manganese, it uses iron. So iron goes from Fe3+ to Fe2+. Fe2+ is soluble in solution as the final electron acceptor. And then if you imagine the water table comes up, all the iron goes in solution, the water table goes down, oxygen comes back, that iron rusts basically out of the water, and you get these speckled patterns of colors based on where that water table is. And it's kind of awesome because if you were siting a septic system, or if you wanted to know where your wetland was, all you have to do is dig a hole and learn how to read these color signatures, because you might have a soil profile and the water table might go there and there, and it never gets higher than that. So above this level is all going to be beautiful brown soil, and below this is going to be red, spotty soil. And you can draw a line, and then entire laws are based on that line, and entire careers are based on people being able to read a soil profile and tell where that water table is, so that they can make land use decisions and planning decisions. And it goes into ag decisions and all kinds of stuff. So drainage class, I think, is a pretty critical soil property. All right, so one thing that Dean is going to talk about is soil physical properties and the Web Soil Survey, and where you get some of this information, right? All these things are available in Soil Survey. So I just wanted to kind of give a quick snapshot of a soil physical properties table. This is for a lapine soil that's in Central Oregon. So you have your depth, it'll have the sand, silt, and clay percentages, a bulk density percentage, saturated hydraulic conductivity percentage range, which is how fast water moves through the soil. So the faster or slower will be the saturated hydraulic conductivity. Water holding capacity, so that is how much the soil is going to hold after all the water that's free to drain exits the profile. Super important for irrigation and growing crops. Linear extensibility is how much that soil shrinks and swells. Pretty important for building structures. Organic matter percentage, erosion factors, which Dean is going to go into a lot more. And then we have some other wind erodibility indexes and groups that Dean's going to talk about more if we're talking about Russell and some of those factors. And these all come together, and they're available on a physical properties table out of the Soil Survey. Any questions before we go on to chemical properties? I know this is a big overview, but we only got an hour and a half, right? Maybe hour, I don't know.
As long as you want.
All right, basic chemical properties of soil. So here again is the basic chemical properties of soils out of the soil survey. The reason I wanted to start with this is because I thought this would be a good way to, there's so many chemical properties of soils, but this is kind of just a nice little snapshot of the things that the NRCS and as soil scientists, we actually write down and map for everybody. These are the things that we have deemed, and through 100 years of experience, know that land managers, when you're buying a piece of property or you're looking at that soil, what do I want to grow here? What's it good for? These are the chemical properties that are the easiest to map and what was going to help you make management decisions. Now, you'll notice, go ahead.
Do you do this for building too?
Yeah, so people use this information for engineering and geotech as well. So you'll notice that I'm not talking about fertility. Right? So your fertility is going to be special tests that are site specific. This is looking at the soil, the lupine across its extent. Here's our range of properties that we believe exist for this soil based on the lab characterization and exploration that we have done. So of course, again, with the depth, so depth is the different horizons. You have cation exchange capacity. And you know, when I was reading the stuff that you needed to know, I got out my college level textbook. And I was like, this Envirothon stuff is for real. Like, they really have to go in depth. But cation exchange capacity is a pretty basic concept. It basically means, okay, everyone knows what a cation is? Yes. All right, so like I said, soils are active. They have lots of charge in them. They have negative sites and positive sites, and cations are those positive sites. And so how the capacity of that soil to interchange between a cation solution and another cation solution on the surface of any activated material such as clay or organic matter, which means that if I am a calcium ion and I'm floating in soil solution, how many negative charges are there in that soil for me to hook onto and hang out until a plant needs to take me up? And that capacity is really driven by a combination of the types of clay minerals and then the level of organic matter. Those are the two big drivers. And so the capacity is the sum total of all the exchangeable cations that the soil, boy, I did not spell check this, that the soil can absorb. And they give it as lots of different units of measure, but in the soil survey it's given as milliequivalents per 100 grams. So there's a lot of information about how you calculate this, and it's kind of cool. Oh, look, I had a graphic. So cation exchange capacity, here is so here's the clay with all the negative charges, and then here's like your manganese, your calcium, your hydrogen, your sodium, with the positives, your potassium, and they are kind of going back and forth. And so clays come, and I wasn't asked to give a whole treatise on soil clay morphology, but basic clays typically in soil exist in sheets with space in between the sheets. And because of the way that the atoms are arranged on the clay mineral, they have a net negative charge. There's a whole chapter in the book on why it's called isomorphic substitution. It's really cool, actually. But they have just know they have a net negative charge. And it's why we have plants, right? Because they have a net negative charge and they can hold on to plant essential nutrients. So these sheets have net negative charge, and this is like a humus, organic, glob of something that has a net negative charge. And here are all the little cations hanging out on the surfaces of those clays and the surfaces of those organic matters, which in soil solution then exchange with plant roots. Soil reaction, pH. Right, we all know pH, negative logarithm of hydrogen ion activity concentration in the soil. In soil, we measure pH either in a 1-to-1 water solution or a 1-to-1 KCl, potassium chloride solution, just depending on your range that you think. Usually you'll do both and then decide which is the better fit. You can buy handheld pH meters that you have to calibrate, and you make a soil slurry and you stick the pH meter in the soil slurry. You can get colorimetric ways where you have different color indicators and you get little cards and you swirl them and you match the card to the pH. And of course, pH is a chemical property that's super critical for plants and soils because this is the range. Here we are at pH of 4 to 10. The green is where that plant essential nutrient, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, boron, copper and zinc, and molybdenum, the range in which, pH range in which it is most available to plants. So understanding if your soil is acidic or basic or alkaline. You need to know, what do I need to do to add lime to make that soil? Basically, every time they're adding lime, especially in the Willamette Valley, we are very naturally acidic soils. We're kind of over naturally in this range, so they add lime to pop it over just to get that stuff to be more available, those plant nutrients in the chemical interactions. And it has everything to do with the amount of hydrogen ions that are taking up spaces instead of cations on that exchange complex. I see some nodding heads. Nobody is totally like walking out the door for this extremely high level soils chemistry class. Hopefully, are you guys still with me? We'll get to the fun stuff, which is the biology next. All right. The last thing I wanted to mention, because a lot of you guys are in Eastern Oregon, is salinity and the sodium absorption ratio. These are chemical properties of the soils. The salinity is a measure of electrical conductivity, which gives an indirect measurement of salt content, and sodium absorption ratio, boy, I did not spell check. This is what happens when you have like 3 presentations in 1 week, and you guys are the last one. So sodium absorption ratio gives information on the comparative concentrations of sodium, calcium, magnesium in soil solution. Why do we care? We care because we want to know if our soils are saline, saline sodic, or sodic. Salinity in soils is a huge problem in agriculture. Like massive. There are huge swaths of California, of the Southeast, that are no longer productive because they have managed their soils in a way that they are now saline or saline sodic, and they cannot grow commodity crops anymore. It's something that it's actually really interesting when you talk about when you add fertilizer to soil. What are you adding? Salt, right? So it's something that we have to be very mindful of as we continue to use a lot of fertilizer. The fertilizer is a great thing, but you got to think about it. So what this graph is showing us is this is electrical conductivity. So that's that salinity measure, and this is the sodium absorption ratio. So that is why the soil survey gives you those 2 numbers. So that as a soil scientist, you can look at this graph and see, okay, what is my electrical conductivity level? And what is my ratio level? And then where am I on the scale between normal, saline, saline sodic, or sodic?
So how do you fix that?
Okay, good question. So saline soil means that there is, and I wrote this down, excessive levels of soluble salts in the solution of soil. So it's in the water in soil. There's a lot of extra sodium and soluble salts in solution. So the number one way to fix that is to flush them out with clean water and to, stop the salty water from coming. So a lot of irrigation water is salty, but it's moving through so quick that it's not building up. But if you have a situation where there's something changes in your water table, or you have a like I mentioned, one of those root limiting layers, or one of those layers in the soil that's going to keep the water from flushing through, or you don't have appropriate drainage, then that will build up. And if you don't fix the salt coming out of your irrigation water, you're not going to fix your salinity problem. Sodic soils are soils that have the element sodium are dominating that exchange complex. So they are stuck in there. So you have to, number one, replace them, usually with gypsum. You replace them with sulfur, with gypsum, you replace them, and then you have to flush them out. This can be extremely expensive, and the reason why they let the ground go is because either they, number one, can't remediate it because there's no outlet or there's not enough clean water available, or the cost is too much to try and do what it's going to take to get that there. So I don't know how much salinity is going to be a part of your Envirothon stuff, but I know that salinity is something that everyone who is a land manager needs to be aware of. It's usually not a Western Oregon issue because we get 40 inches of lovely clean water every year, and we tend to just flush everything away. But you get anywhere else, Eastern Oregon, parts of the country, this is definitely a huge issue.
So it's shutting down our ability to grow crops.
Once you are saline sodic, or sodic, your crop productivity is going down.
In California, is part of that the drought?
Yeah, probably. A lot of California is that they're getting really, really salty irrigation water. Like water coming out of, well, don't quote me, but the Colorado River and stuff, there's a particular, if I'm I might be wrong, but there's a particular stretch where it goes through a natural geology that has just a lot of salts in it, and it gets just full of salts, and then they're using that to irrigate with. And if they can't flush it out, then they have this issue.
And is it that the salt grabs the water so that the plant doesn't have the water?
Yeah, it has to do with osmosis in the water. So plants that are salt tolerant have all kinds of cool ways that they have evolved to exclude the sodium from, barriers so that the osmosis in the water isn't lost. And lots of other adaptations that I'm not an expert on. Any other questions? I have a really cool publication from North Dakota that talks about saline and sodic soils if you're interested in learning more. All right, any questions? How are we on time? Are we good? Oh, good. Okay, so this is the fun part. Not that chemical and physical properties aren't awesome, says the person who spent the first half of her career making soil maps and mapping chemical and physical properties of soils. But this part is super fun because this is how soil works. This is how it all comes together. And really, those physical and chemical properties all kind of drive the next part. So I'm gonna have another cup of tea. All right, so what do we want soil to do for us? We just talked a lot about what soil is, right? It has properties, it has color, it has chemistry. Dean's gonna talk about how we describe them, how we classify it. But what do we want soil to do?
Store water.
Store water, grow plants. Say again?
Provide structure.
Provide structure and stability. I heard another one. Maybe?
Clean water.
Clean water. Right. Those are all awesome and appropriate. Your teachers are good. Soil functions, right? So soil does stuff for us. All the time. It did this before there were humans. It's going to do it after there are humans, right? It does this it does not take Christmas off. Soil is constantly doing these things for us. It is providing habitat for organisms, including ourselves, all the critters that live in soil. It is water supply and purification. So it is holding the water, releasing the water, and cleaning it as it goes through. It's holding up the building that we're sitting in, right? So they build buildings on soil mediums. It's recycling nutrients and organic matter, and of course it's a place for plants to put their roots down and grow so that we can all enjoy our pastry in the back of the room, right? So soil is doing this for us, but how does it do it? I talked about physical properties, I talked about chemical properties, but those are just things you can measure. They're inert. So how is it actually doing this stuff? Well, that's the biology, and that's fun, right? And I came to this later in my career, and I remember it was in April of 2012, and the chief of the NRCS has a chief. He lives in Washington, D.C., and he's in charge of the agency. And every once in a while, you get an email from the chief, to the whole agency, and the chief said, "We're going to do soil health." And I was in my little cube farm, and I pop up. Did anybody else see the email from the chief? We're going to do soil health. How do this is going to be awesome. And this truly has become a huge emphasis for us as an agency, going back to our roots of soil conservation and really taking us to that kind of final frontier in soils where in the last 100 years we could only really measure the chemical and physical properties, but now we're finally, with the technology and the cost effectiveness of lab analysis, able to really dive into biology. So we're going to talk about that through the Soil Food Web. How many of you guys have seen a picture of the Soil Food Web? I apologize if you were here a few years ago when I gave this talk. I have new pictures, so it will be a little bit fresh. But what is this? The sun. And what is the sun doing? Shining. And what is that sunshine? Energy. Yes. And what are these little flags, green flags that float in the atmosphere? They are little engines of photosynthesis, right? So they're taking the sun's energy and they're through the awesomeness that is photosynthesis and sun's energy and carbon dioxide, changing it into carbon for all our carbon-based life forms. So that's an awesome thing that you guys teach. And so what's happening when that plant is creating carbon to build itself, to build its roots, to build its leaves, to build its trunks, to build its stems, to build its seeds, to build its structure. It's building itself, but it's also doing something else. Depending on what paper you read, it can be 25 to 35% of the carbon that a plant creates through photosynthesis, it actually does not keep for itself. It exudes out into the soil through its roots. And that carbon, that energy that plant is pumping out into the soil is to start to feed the engine that is the soil food web. So on your soil food web, we have bacteria, we have fungi, nematodes. I'm going to go into way more detail than you ever wanted to know about what all these guys do. And every one of these arrows is an energy transformation of something going from the primary producers, the plants, through the organisms, all the way up the trophic levels to higher level predators and humans, right? So what are all these different levels and how do they work together? How many are there, right? So 10 feet squared of soil. So imagine your yard. You imagine this lawn out here. 10 feet squared of soil is like kind of this little corner by the window, right? 10 feet, 10 feet. In that you have 10 trillion bacteria. Trillion, right? Lots. 100 billion fungi, 10 billion protozoa, 5 million nematodes, 100,000 mites, 50,000 springtails. I mean, lots of stuff, right? So by biomass, this is how much all of that weighs. So in an acre, you have 27,000 pounds of living stuff living in the soil. That's like a couple elephants, right? So when you think, and your students or whoever you might be talking to, and they're talking about soil, and they're thinking about how it's just the sand and the silt and the clay and the air and the water and then some organic matter. By weight, that's a lot of stuff. Lots of stuff. So,
Western Oregon soils, or
that's a generalization, but ag soils, you can consider it ag soils. So where you might not have as much fungi and arranged on soil, you tend to have actinomycetes and bacteria that fill in their ecological niches. So as you get drier, you're going to have less. As you get wetter into the forest, you're going to have more. Those are just for typical ag soils, probably out of the Midwest. So I would say that's probably comparable to what you'd have in the Willamette Valley, if not more in the Willamette Valley. I don't know who asked that question. Okay, so this is another way to think of it. 1 cup of soil. So if you imagine you're baking cookies because it's the holidays, you got 1 cup of soil. It has as many bacteria of more than there are people on the planet. So when you go out there and you take your students and you have them all grab a handful of soil, they're holding more organisms than there are people on the planet. And it's awesome. And the bacteria are really kind of the engines of the soil. They are the guys who are in there. There's those single-celled organisms that are just chugging away, doing their little biological life, making things happen. So we have legumes. So you have rhizobia as a type of bacteria. You guys all know they fix atmospheric nitrogen, make it plant available. Bacteria are decomposing small things. They live in the films along soil. They coat roots because that root is pumping out that carbon, so that bacteria want to live there. And their bodies are full of all the elements, so nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, right? They're cycling all of that stuff. So bacteria are kind of the power stations. And then you have fungi. A teaspoon of ag soil has 10 yards of fungi. You can imagine, so a teaspoon, right? And then forest soil has 10 miles. So teeny tiny, the hyphae, like single cell little guys out there. The fungi are the super highways in the soil. So they have relationships with plant roots. So there's ectomycorrhizal fungi, which kind of swarm around a plant root, and there's endomycorrhizal fungi, which will actually go inside the plant root. And that plant directly, it's like tap that vein, right? It's just pumping carbon into that fungi, and then that fungi takes that carbon and explores the soil in places a root hair could never dream of going, because it's longer and smaller and stronger, and it pumps water and phosphorus back to that plant. So that's fungi. So they're kind of the superhighways. And then you have your protozoa and your nematodes. So protozoas and nematodes, I like to think of them as predators, right? So I mentioned that those bacteria bodies and those fungal bodies, they're full of sulfur, magnesium, potassium, nitrogen, calcium, boron, manganese. What are those things? What are those things? Just elements, nutrients. Those are those things on that pH scale, right, of plant essential nutrients. Well, if you're a bacteria, you're basically a living bag of fertilizer. And how are we going to get all of that great fertilizer out of that? We're going to use a protozoa or a nematode. We're going to impale your guts. We're going to spill it out. And I'll go into a little bit more about how it becomes available. The other great thing about nematodes and protozoas is that they are, mostly nematodes, they're kind of the semi-trucks of the soil. They move in the water film. So if a bacteria is a single cell little guy and a nematode is a few cells bigger, protozoa is like a bigger single cell thing, they can move further. So they'll take nutrients and kind of move them around into areas where now a plant root has access to that stuff. Nematodes have a bad rap. Most of them are actually not that bad. We hear about them as pests in agricultural systems because the populations get out of whack and you have nematodes that hurt your plants. But for the most part, most nematodes are actually beneficial. Then you have arthropods. These are kind of the demolition crew of the soil, I guess you could say. So these are everything from the ants or the mites that you can see when you lift up a rock to the things you need electron microscopes to see, which are these little mites. And every time you take a step in a mature Oregon forest, your foot is being supported on the back of 16,000 invertebrates held up by an average of 120,000 legs. So if you walk through the next time you're on a hike, you're like, sorry, right? These are awesome. They have these fantastic mouth parts, right? Just to shred. These are the things nightmares are made out of, right? These are, monsters are real. They're just teeny small and they live under your tree. So these guys are breaking down organic matter. So they're taking big organic matter and they're making it smaller so that different levels of organisms can break it down further till it becomes that really stable humus. All right, earthworms are the engineers. Earthworms can turn over the top 6 inches of the soil every 10 to 20 years. How many of you guys have like reached into your garden and like picked up a handful of soil and like give it a nice, right after it rained and smells so earth, are those aromatics that actually produce endorphins in our brains, right? So you're holding that lovely, lovely topsoil. You're really just holding worm poop, right? Because everything in topsoil has gone through the body of a worm. And worms are the engineers because they, number one, when they burrow, they're actually tunneling through the soil and the gooey stuff on their bodies is pressing it together, making those big pores. And then when they're ingesting the soil, they actually have gut populations of bacteria that are really, really good at forming these casts, which stick soil particles together strongly. We're going to talk a lot more about that. So when you think about the soil food web, what we're talking about is all those different elements, all those kind of categories of creatures, and we know more about the solar system and stars than we know about the types of creatures that live in the soil, mostly bacteria and stuff, because number one, it wasn't until like the last couple years that they could actually culture soil bacteria in a lab and it would live, right? Because it's hard to take it out of its system. So, and it's just now that they actually have phospholipid fatty acid assessments that are cost effective enough that you can run huge genetic profiles of the organisms that live in soil, so you can start to see who's there, what activities are they doing, how many of them, what functional groups there are. And it's only really in the last few years that we're opening up this understanding of the soil food web, and the final frontier is really going to be molecular understanding of these things, and then how those different molecular functional groups do certain things, with the idea being, can we go to a field and run an assessment and say, you're missing this suite of organisms who are really good at cycling potassium. So what can you do as a manager to get those guys there that are going to cycle your potassium?
That's what I'm kind of wondering. There seems to be like a huge need to understand those better so that we could maybe fix those soils that have all the extra salt and that kind of thing, that maybe there's microbes that could do that. Is there funding or jobs?
Well, there's research for sure. And at the national level, this agency, NRCS, and a lot of nonprofits, I mean, if you go into, I don't know how much exposure you guys have to trade, agricultural trade magazines, but understanding soil function and managing in a way that improves soil function is pretty much huge right now, and it continues to grow because we're tapped out on increasing yield by putting more fertilizer on it. It's just, there is no more that we can do. And so this is the last way of like, okay, we've tapped that out. What can we do to increase soil function in a way that's going to continue to either increase or sustain our agricultural productivity capacity? And high functioning soils is really, it's the end of the green revolution. People are starting to call it maybe the brown revolution, where they're starting to look at soil biology as that last tier of management. And we'll talk a little bit even more about that. Because what you want is those soil organisms that are driving soil function. Remember the things we want it to do. We want it to hold water, store water. We want it to cycle nutrients. We want it to protect our plants. We want it to clean water. We want it to store carbon, right? What's the best way to get all that carbon out of the atmosphere? Make it go through a plant and put it in the ground. That's where it all came from, right? So plants are really going to be able to help that. We want them to enhance soil structure. We want them to drive cycling, modify the atmosphere, and then of course the more robust and resilient a soil food web you have, the more robust and resilient your soil will be from pathogens and pressures, disease pressures and stuff, because you have competition in that. All right, so I have two top favorite things that I love about the soil food web. Before I get into that, how are we on tape and should we take a break?
You've got 9 minutes of tape left.
Okay, so in 9 minutes, we'll take a stand-up break. Sound good? Okay, so my top two. The things that I love about what the soil food web does and what helped me understand why it's so important is the nutrient cycling. Because when you have a soil food web, you have all those organisms there, you're building pools of nutrients in your soil ecosystem. So you're building storage of plant essential nutrients in the bodies of the creatures that are living in the soil. And all the fertilizer we put on soil, except for maybe a few specific expensive forms, all of that gets to that plant root through the body of a microorganism, right? So you don't just put fertilizer on the ground and it magically gets taken up, like a direct relationship to that plant root. It has to get mitigated by some sort of biological element. So you have organisms that are in there, and when you have strong organisms function, you have soil resilience, and you could potentially, and this is a big potential, I'm not saying fertilizer use is going to end, but you can sometimes manage these systems in a way that you can reduce your footprint of the amendments that you have to add. So this is, and poor Dean, he's seen this slide so many times, and every time for the last few years, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to draw it again. I haven't yet, right? So this is just how nutrient cycling works. And it's all about carbon to nitrogen ratios. You guys remember carbon to nitrogen ratios? Everything has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. This cup has a very, very high carbon to nitrogen ratio, right? You have a carbon to nitrogen ratio. The beautiful grass outside has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. The plant, the bacteria in soils have a carbon to nitrogen ratio. And a typical carbon to nitrogen ratio of a bacteria is 5 carbons for every nitrogen, right? And if you're a protozoa, your carbon to nitrogen ratio is 8 to 1. So for every 1 nitrogen you need 8 carbons. So if you're a protozoa swimming in the soil solution, and these guys will eat like 1 million bacteria a day. They just like go along those channels and spaces and they just graze, right? So they're grazing. This guy will eat 2 of my 5 to 1 bacteria. And so he'll get 8 of his carbon and 1 of his nitrogen, and out the other end comes 2 extra carbon and 2 nitrogen. Now that's the nitrogen that is now available to absorb onto that cation exchange complex and be available to a root. So the way that we get all our elements is through this process of the different ratios. Protozoa are great, 20 carbon to 1 nitrogen. So he's going to eat 4 of these bacteria. He's only going to need 1 of those nitrogen, and 3 of them are going to be available. So that's why having these robust and diverse populations is going to give you the nutrient cycling, because there's a carbon to nitrogen ratio, there's a carbon to potassium ratio, there's a carbon to calcium ratio, there's a carbon to magnesium ratio. And as we ingest these things, as these organisms go through this, they're taking what they need and they are releasing what is then available for plant cycling and uptake. Nutrient cycling, totally awesome. That's how it works. Water holding capacity. How many of you guys, a lot of you guys are from drier areas that you have irrigation. How many of you guys work in areas where you drive to school and you see irrigation? Some? Okay, so irrigation is super critical for a lot of agriculture across the state and across the country. And robust soil food webs that are high in organic matter have a direct impact on the amount of irrigation water and water holding capacity that soils have. So here are some graphs. This is soil water content. On the y-axis, and the x-axis is soil organic carbon. And then we have two lines. This is permanent wilting point. So wilting point is the line below which, where the water, there's not enough water, that plant's gonna die. Permanent wilting, it can't get any more water out of the ground or whatever medium it's in. When the water content drops below that, the plant's toast, can't get it. Field capacity is the level at which, after imagine a rain event, water moves through the soil, the water that's free to drain drains away, and what's left in the soil being held on in the soil aggregates and the pores is what's available to the plant. That's field capacity. And so the amount of water between field capacity and wilting point is the plant available water. Okay. And so what we want to do as irrigators, as land managers, this is a sandy soil, this is a silt loam soil. So again, texture is going to be a big driver of the amount of water that a soil will hold. We want to increase the amount of water that is available to the plant. So if we're irrigators, we can irrigate less. If we're doing rain-fed agriculture, we can get more bang for our raindrop, right? The more, we can hold more of those raindrops in the soil so they're available for the crops we want to grow. And the number one easiest way to do that is to increase your organic matter. You're not going to change the amount of sand, silt, or clay in your soil. Doesn't work. If you have a really clayey soil and you say, I'm going to make my soil breathe better and be less wet, I'm going to add sand. What you're doing is to be a really great recipe for cement, right? Let's add sand to clay to our soil and make cement. What we want to do is we want to add organic matter. And as you can see, as the organic matter goes up, this zone of plant available water increases. That's dollar signs, right? People, water is a commodity. And so as we work and as land managers have to consider our water use, building organic matter in soils is a way to get more water or use the water you have more efficiently. All right, so now we're going to talk about the coolest thing about soil, right? And that is this. This is soil, right? This is it. This, and the technical term for this is PED, the study of why soils are where they are and why they look like they look. Why they are where they are is geomorphology. Why they look like they look is pedology. And you can be a pedologist when you grow up. This is a ped or clod or clump or, a clod. So, but really what this is the synthesis of the chemical, physical, and biological properties in the soil. If you understand soil aggregate management, you are head and shoulders above your neighbors who don't, because this is how it all happens. And so we're going to actually spend quite a lot of time talking about soil aggregates. And because aggregates are pretty much the most important thing ever. There's one, I keep mentioning my college textbook, but there's one line in the beginning of the college textbook that says, and it's the Nature and Properties of Soils by Brady and Weil. If you have a chance, that's the one to buy. But that basically says soil aggregate management is the most difficult part of farming, but it is the most important because it is through appropriate management of aggregates that you get the most lift in soil function. All right, so here is a hierarchical diagram of aggregate formation and why I'm going to spend so much time talking about this, because it truly is a synthesis of everything I've been talking about. So here we have really teeny tiny primary particles. So you have iron oxide, so here's silt, right? That's the bones. Here's clay, humus, kind of little sections. Here's microbial debris, iron oxides coating those. And then you have pores here. And at this point, you're having negative and positive charges attracting together, holding these bits together as a primary particle. And then you have the next up, you get to the next section. So this little section is right here in this bigger clod of soil, submicrogate aggregate, where mineral grains become encrusted by that organic material in the sticky stuff that the organisms are putting together. And then you have, here a root hair coming through here, and those root hair and the hyphae from the fungi and the polysaccharides start to kind of mesh these things together. Then you end up with a macro aggregate, which the macro starts at 3 millimeters, where you start to have these kind of like chunks of stuff, and those chunks all build together until you have a clod. Okay, so all of that goes into creating the essential thing of what a soil aggregate provides, which is habitat. Soil aggregates are habitat because all that biology, all that function, all that chemistry, all that nutrient cycling, all that holding of water, all that gas exchange, all of that is happening where the mineral particles are not. It's happening in the space. And you have to have soils that have space for all of that to happen. Here's a cross-section of a soil aggregate. You have a root here. You have fungal hyphae. This is an endomycorrhizal fungi. So it's coming in and it's connecting with this root and it is circling through these different particles. And the cool thing about soil, and the thing that, I know I've been doing this for 16 years now, but the thing that still blows my mind is just how complex it is. Because here you have a pore, right? And this is an ocean. It's a salty sea, and here is your nice amoeba floating it, and here's your, sea serpent swimming around in this lovely ocean of soil water that has a pH. It has dissolved elements in it. It has a certain, amount of dissolved oxygen, and it's all happily living in this nice salty sea. And then you come around here, and you have a desert. Right? So you have a dry soil pore, maybe there's a little water film right here that this guy's trying to slowly make his way around the cliff to the ocean, and you have these little clay things here, and you've got some bacteria that are living on the edges, but in the middle it is dry, it's just air and it's deserty. And then over here you have a lake. This nice little lake, and it's got some amoebas in it, and it has these nice fungal hyphae that are harvesting the water, and it's got its own pH signature and its own dissolved organic matter and its own gases in it and its own special population of organisms. And this might be the only place on the planet where this organism exists, right? And it's all here. So you have a terrestrial ecosystem right next to an aquatic ecosystem, and then not even just any aquatic ecosystem, an oceanic aquatic ecosystem next to a freshwater ecosystem, next to the desert, and maybe this is a valley, right? This is all on the size of a pin. But then you have Godzilla, right? So Godzilla is going to come and he wants to eat that amoeba. He wants to eat this organic matter. So he's just chugging along, right? He's the demolition crew. He's going to knock this over. This particle is going to have a cataclysmic, fall, and the lake is going to drain into the desert, right? And now we have a whole new aquatic ecosystem, and this lake dries up and becomes a desert, and you have a whole new terrestrial ecosystem. And multiply this by a scale that our human brains can't even begin to imagine, and this is what's happening right outside the window. All the time, right? So soil aggregates are habitat because they are the space in which all this can happen. And the parts of the soil food web are what create this habitat. So what do roots do? Roots are penetrating the soil. They are reaching in. They are pushing particles away. They are wrapping around soil particles. They're putting them together. They are creating soil and water exchange. They're drying up the lakes, or they're pumping carbon into the soil to change the chemistry of the lakes around them. They are decomposing, things, and they're entangling. They decompose, so they add organic matter to the system when they die, and they're entangling particles, and they're pushing them together, right? Here are fungi. Fungi are fun. They enmesh. In something that, as the technical term, is a sticky string bag, right? So here's net-like fungal mycelia that actually just envelop. This is stuff out of science fiction, right? You see the alien whoosh, envelops the brain. Well, that's what's happening in the soils, is these hyphae just wrap around these soil particles and push them together. And guess what's in the inside of that? Carbon. Super, super stable carbon that's not going to the atmosphere because it's being trapped inside these soil particles. And then you have these actinomycetes, which are filamentous kind of bacterial things, and they actually, they make a bridge. They literally are sticking sand particles together and clay particles together, forming these bridges that are holding this, creating that space, the teeny tiny space, the tiny space, the medium space, the big space, the really big space that gives you that complex array of spaces where life happens. Glomalin is an exudate of fungi, which is really sticky and holds things together. Then you have bacteria. So bacteria are, there's a reason your mom said wash your hands, or your dad, when you go in for dinner, right? Because you've got, a couple million organisms on them if you've been playing in the soil. And they're sticky. They have mucilages, and there's all those polysaccharides, which work to, this is an aggregate, right? Millions of those in here. And all that green is all of the polysaccharide mucilages that have just coated the outside of that soil aggregate. And then here are little sticky ovals of little polysaccharides growing between bacteria where we're like, I want to be here for a while and I don't want to move, so I'm going to stick onto this soil particle. And so they actually just kind of make this snotty mess of home, right? They're building their home. And then you have worms. Worms are awesome. Worms will burrow, so you have like a normal fragmented pores in a cropland soil. And a lot of cropland soils that get regular disturbance don't have a lot of earthworms. So they have teeny tiny pores that are hard for water to move through. In a grassland soil, where you have a lot more presence of earthworms, or in a forest soil, or in a system that you're managing for lower disturbance, you're going to have these tunnels going through these interstitial spaces, which are large interconnected pores, which are super critical for water movement and for gas exchange. So if you imagine those big pores in soil, those worm tunnels in that space, it rains really heavy like we had over Thanksgiving here on the west side, and all the soil fills up, right? And you just see water everywhere. And then what happens a couple of days later? It drains out. What happens after it drains? Right? All that fresh air is coming in after that rainwater, and that's where that fresh infusion of oxygen is happening, and where the soil is kind of breathing through those large interconnected pores, many of which are built by worms or old root channels that have decomposed over time, and so they leave a space. There's different ways they get there. All right, so there's also physical and chemical factors that help with soil aggregate formation. So these are in your drier climates or your colder climates. You might have drying and wetting cycles. Water expands and shrinks when it freezes and thaws. Rocks are soluble in water. It just takes a long time. So you have drying and wetting that will, go through fissures in rocks and crack and shrink, and fire. Fire will heat up soil, and they'll change temporarily or long term depending on the intensity of the fire. What is going on with the organisms there? And then you have those, remember I mentioned durpans and silica? Those are inorganic binding agents. So those are things that are creating soil aggregates through different binding agents that are inorganic chemicals. And you'll find those in the drier climates because there's not enough rain to dissolve them slowly away. So all those factors go into, here's the quote. The formation and maintenance of a high degree of aggregation is one of the most difficult tasks of soil management. It is also one of the most important since it is a potent means of influencing ecosystem function. So organic matter feeds the soil food web. The soil food web creates stable structure, and if you have stable structure, you have high functioning soils. So just for fun, and you can do this demo with your classes, or however you want to work it, but I have two soils. They are the same soil. They are Woodburn Silt Loam from Corvallis, Oregon. Plant Materials Center is a research farm by NRCS. And one of these, since it's a research farm, they have to have very clean fields. By clean, I mean weed-free, pest-free, debris-free. So they till quite a bit to clean the fields, keep them free of other vegetation. And the other soil, and I actually don't remember which is which, it is from a permanent strip of willow cuttings that people go in and take sticks, stems from willow cuttings to do stream bank stabilization. So one of these is very undisturbed, and one of these is highly disturbed. And so all you need to do is find, you can go around your neighborhood or a local farm or somewhere around where there's like a fence row and then maybe a more disturbed area, and you just collect soil, you just let them air dry, and then you don't have to have this fancy setup. You can just even cut a water bottle in half, right? It doesn't have to be super fancy, and then we will see what happens. Would anyone at the front like to say what's happening? Oh, this one is breaking more than it should. I think because it was dirty.
There's still a big contrast.
Yeah. So one of these is falling apart, and one of these is doing a better job staying together. And though it's nice when this one stays together more, what the reality is most agriculture is between those two extremes. So what do we think is happening in this one that's staying together?
It's got more organic matter to keep it together.
It's got more organic matter to keep it together. So all of those polysaccharides, those glomalins, those fungal hyphae, those exudates, that sticky stuff is making that soil so strong that it can withstand, excuse me, my voice is going out a little bit. It can withstand that force, the internal force of that water rushing in. There's a lot of pressure to have that water rushing into those pores, and it's strong enough that it can, like a pipe, right? It can withstand that water pressing against all those little cavities. Whereas this soil, which has been more disturbed, has less organic matter, no longer has the strength to withstand the internal forces of that water rushing in, and it's shattering. And it's just the way it is. I mean, a lot of the ways that we manage, we end up with soils that are prone to being lower strength. And without that strength and that structure, they shatter. And what happens when soil shatters? Erosion. And I'll talk a lot more. Oh, the next slide. Look at that. The doom and gloom slide. What happens when you have intensive tillage, soil erosion, and insufficient added residues? You lose soil organic matter. What happens when you lose soil organic matter? Your aggregates start to break down. And what happens with that? You get surface becomes compacted and a crust forms. Who is driven by a field that looks slick? Right? That is because all these soil particles have shattered and filled those other holes, right? So water can't get in anymore. So it's just sealed up, and then it just starts running away. And then you have more erosion by wind and water. Talking a lot about erosion later today. Then you lose more organic matter, so you have less water storage, less diversity, less organisms, fewer nutrients for plants, and then your crop yields are reduced. And if you're in sub-Saharan Africa, you have hunger and malnutrition. All of the, if you ever get a chance, I know some of you have, to listen to James Cassidy from Oregon State University speak about soil. He puts up you can draw a geopolitical map of the world based on soil order and how soils are degraded. So where is our high conflict zones? Places that had been really at the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East is now super degraded soils, high conflict zone. The world superpowers, former USSR and the United States of America, great, healthy, high functioning soils. So there's a lot of fun parallels you can draw with that. And really where we are in the United States, for the most part, we're not at hunger and malnutrition yet, though we are having soils and farmland that is being abandoned because it is beyond repair. And so, but most of the time we're above this dashed line. And this is all from a free publication called Building Soils for Better Crops that is available online. You can download the book from Western SARE. And remind me what SARE stands for, Sustainable Ag Research and Extension. And it's a USDA organization. They have a great library of resources that are free to download. And this graphic is straight out of that. So doom and gloom, right? If we're managing soils in a way that we lose their strength and we lose soil aggregates. And that's why I spend so much time on aggregates. Because aggregates, when you want to decide, do I have a high functioning soil or a low functioning soil? And you got to think about one way to measure or one thing to think about, how good are your soil aggregates? That's going to answer that question for you. All right, so this gets us into the uplifting version. So we had, what is it? Star Wars, and like the middle one's the sad one, and then the third one's the happy one, Return of the Jedi. This is the Return of the Jedi when it comes to soil health. So principles of healthy soils. We want to manage for healthy soils by considering biology and function in everything we do, right? So as teachers, how many guys are also farmers or gardeners, or have family that are farmers or gardeners? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you as land managers, right? And I bet a lot of the folks who are in rural schools or in even our Willamette Valley schools have students who might be participating in Verathon who are growing up on farms or whose families are farm managers. So it is up to those folks who have, well, it's up to everybody, but really it is within everyone's capacity who manages land to think about soil function and soil biology in their management schemes. So this is going to be starting to look at the land management side of your objectives and how you interpret all this information and then make decisions across the landscape. And what we want to do is we want to have the soil aggregation climb. So if we have low biological activity, low organic matter, what we want to do is we want to increase these things. We want to add biology, we want to add organic matter to an river, we want to improve nutrient cycling, and all of this happens with our management practices that are invisible and dynamic processes that are happening in the soil based on the decisions that we make. So we can cross that threshold to have improved soil structure and improved water holding capacity, which are our visible outcomes that give us that efficiency, better yield, and in theory, and often more resiliency in not only in our soil strength, but also in our profit line as producers. So we had our soil degradation spiral, here's our soil aggregation climb, and here's how we're going to do it. There are 4 principles to healthy soils. And what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking to you guys about today is the land management perspective of different options and ways in which folks who are farmers, ranchers, or foresters can manage their properties and their enterprises in a way that has soil health in mind. I have gone and spoken to farmer groups, and the only handout I give them is the soil food web. And I tell them, put this on your fridge. And every morning, after you feed the dog, after you feed the sheep, after you have your own breakfast, you look at your fridge and say, what am I going to give to my soil organisms today? Right? Because you got to feed them too. So there's 4 of them. We're going to go through all of these. We want to keep it covered, minimize disturbance, keep a living root year-round, and diversity above for diversity below. The 5th one would be incorporate livestock. But these are kind of the basics that you'll see here. So we want to minimize disturbance and maximize soil cover. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to maintain stable aggregates, reduce erosion and runoff, buffer temperature. Like all things living, they have a sweet spot in temperature where we are happy, and when it's too cold or too hot, we're not as happy. In summer, even here in Western Oregon, there can be a 20-degree difference between bare soil and soil under a crop canopy or a plant canopy. And after about 90 degrees, and soils will get that hot, the biological activity in that soil just tanks. And what do we want to be happening right in the middle of when our crops are growing? Biological activity. So we want, if you have more organic matter, you have more buffers and temperatures. We want to reduce evaporation. We want the water to go to the plants and not just escape to the atmosphere. And we want our organic matter for that water holding capacity, infiltration and storage, all that sort of thing. So minimize disturbance and maximizing soil cover protects soil biota. So you can think of those 4 principles as feed and protect, right? 2 of them are protecting the soil by disturbance and cover. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to feed the soil. We want to provide continuous living roots, and we want to maximize biodiversity. So why do we want to do this? Because if you think about these things, when you want to maximize biodiversity, how I mentioned how different plant roots our plants send so much carbon out into the soil from their roots. Well, a plant is going to send a single sweet of carbon out into that soil. And that type of carbon is going to select for a certain type of microorganism that's going to do really well and outcompete everybody to eat that kind of carbon. And so you kind of skew, in the monoculture, you actually skew the population of microorganisms in the soil towards those who are best at eating and processing and outcompeting their neighbors for the structure of the carbon that's coming out of that plant. So corn after corn after corn, you got all the corn microorganisms, right? So what we want to do is by maximizing biodiversity is you have lots of different flavors of carbon going into that soil and helping increase the populations of lots of different organisms. And what that does is it builds resiliency and diversity that help break disease cycles, help buffer against disease cycles, increase populations of predator microorganisms, increase organic matter. I mean, I'm starting to get repetitive now. This is how awesome this stuff is. You get all these benefits, right? And then you want to feed those continuous, have those living roots in the soil, because what happens is the soil doesn't stop, right? So how many of you guys have pets? right? So when it's starting to get cold now, are you going to go put your puppy outside and say, okay, I'll see you in spring? No, you feed them every day and you take care of them every day. You got to think of those microorganisms as another pet, right? As your little herd, your shepherds of your microorganisms. You might think you don't have livestock, but you do. There's thousands of pounds of them in your garden, right? And you got to feed them all the time. And what you do that by having plant roots, pumping carbon down as long as possible throughout the year. And obviously some parts of the state are going to have a growing season that, stops and kind of goes dormant. In Western Oregon, the grass grows all year long. So it's easy to have that continuous living root. The thing about having cover crops and that sort of stuff in there too is when spring starts to warm up, if those biology has had food all winter, then it's ready to kind of jump into high gear quicker than if it was laying dormant waiting for that carbon to start coming because something is starting to grow. Okay, so how do you actually do that? I have kind of a selection of options. I was trying to cater to both East and West Oregon because I know a lot of you guys are from all around the state. So if you're at a garden scale, you would do things like relay cropping to add diversity. So you plant one thing and you're going to harvest it, so you plant the other thing right before. So that starts to grow, you harvest the next thing, and then the next thing starts to grow. So you're never having a break in cover. Crop rotation is huge, and crop rotation can be in time and space, right? So if you have a garden or a farm system and you can rotate the type of plant through to break cycles, that's rotation in space, but you can also rotate in time. So if you only have one space, you can rotate the type of crop singularly in that area. And what that does, and there's lots of guides on cover cropping and they're more sophisticated than what I'm talking about, but it's a way in which when you think about rotation, think of it both over time and space. And of course, companion planting, especially on a garden scale or a small organic farm, I've worked with producers who are working on like an acre or two where they have the opportunity to do something like companion planting where they're putting complementary plants together. So you want diversity above for diversity below to get those different types of carbon in there, to jumpstart the different microorganisms. In the range systems, you want diversity above for diversity below because of the different types of structure. So these are common range plants. So we have our biological soil crust, lichens, mosses, bacteria. This is responsible for a lot of the photosynthesis and primary production in our range systems. And then you have our invasive weeds. So when you see your cheatgrass and your Medusa head rye, I think I'm saying that right, it's just got this teeny tiny little root structure here. But then you start to get into our native range plants. So you've got your perennial grasses, your deep-rooted grasses, your forbs, perennial forbs, shallow-rooted bunch grasses, mid-rooted annuals, and then deep-rooted perennial shrubs. Look how much of this soil profile is being fed by these plants. Look at all the water that these plants have access to compared to those areas that are just actually decimated by these invasive annual weeds. NRCS is investing a lot of money to help sage-grouse habitat in the eastern parts of our state. And the first phase was getting rid of juniper, and the second phase is starting to tackle ways in which we can actually tackle these annual weeds, or annual grasses. And that's because we want to create this system where we have this robust biodiversity, because look at all the stuff that's happening underneath the soil. All right, next I want to keep it covered. Dean is going to talk a lot about erosion. I had a whole class in graduate school on erosion, and I walked in the first day, and it was like, erosion, stop it by keeping the soil covered. And I walked out the last day, yep, same way to stop erosion, just keep the soil covered, right? But it's hard. It's so hard. You'd think after a couple hundred years we've got this figured out. Why do we want to keep the soil covered? Well, we want to stop erosion and we want to help with temperature. And what happens, and I hope you can visualize this, is that raindrop is falling at terminal velocity from the sky. It is hitting the soil surface, and each individual raindrop is like a bomb or a comet, and it hits that soil surface, and all that energy is being transferred into hitting the soil, and it shatters the particles, and they go into the air, and they either wash away or they fill in all those little cracks. What a cover crop is doing is it's that little soft pillow across the soil where all that energy of that raindrop hits that plant and the energy dissipates. And now the water can just go into the soil, low energy, infiltrate into the soil and this make its way into the pores. And you can keep the soil covered by cover cropping, relay cropping again, or adding a mulch in a lot of our smaller scale agricultural systems, or in your gardens, or sometimes even if they have access. I know a lot of orchards are using mulch if they have it on an agronomic scale, the access to the mulch. So mulching is another way that keeps the soil temperature buffered and intercepts the energy of that raindrop to keep the soil in place. So from a rangeland or an Eastern Oregon perspective, keeping the soil covered is going to have to do with stocking rates of cattle out there. So you want to make sure you're grazing at a level in which the grass has enough energy to continue its growth cycle. I'm not a range scientist, but we can talk about this more if you want. And it really does come down to basically stocking rates, and then management practices that eliminate those annual grasses and try to get those perennials in there. And here we have in Eastern Oregon, one of our big perennials is alfalfa. So it's just growing, it'll be in for like 5 years, 10 years before they switch it out. So you have that covered over there. So keeping a living root year round, part of the year you're going to be growing your commodity crop, the crop that you want to sell to make money. And then where are the spaces in your crop rotation can you incorporate a cover crop? And that is really challenging. It would be fascinating for me to see Envirothon groups work on cover cropping, because it is one of the hottest topics right now as far as looking at individual farming systems and seeing how you can incorporate the right cover crop. Because cover cropping, it's like so many people come up to me after I speak and they're like, oh, I want to do a cover crop. What do you recommend? It's like, okay, you got 4 hours? Because I got to know about your life philosophy when you decide what to cover crop with. Because it's all about, what do you want that cover crop to do? Do you want it to add nitrogen? Do you want it to scavenge nitrogen? Do you want it to build biomass? Do you want it to grow through the winter and then die? Or do you want it to grow all the way through spring? What are you going to do if you get all excited and plant Sudan grass and now you have 8-foot tall grass? Right? You got to do something with it. So how are you going to terminate that cover crop? Do you have the equipment? Do you have the right irrigation to get it going in October? Are you all a rain-fed system, so you got to do some sort of relay thing? There are books and there are resources. Western States has another book I recommend, Cover Cropping Profitably. Is that it, Dean? How to cover crop profitably?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, and they have tables. And in those tables would be like, okay, if you want nitrogen cover crops, here's the ones. Oregon State University has wonderful extension publications, cover crops in Western Oregon. The NRCS and the Northwest Plant Materials Center just came out with a Pacific Northwest cover crop calculator, where you actually go in, put in your precip zone into this tool, and you say what that objective is, and it gives you recommendations, which would be an excellent tool for you guys in your Envirothon work to do scenarios. Mm-hmm.
Can I go back to the aggregates with the cover crop?
Mm-hmm.
How do you harvest plant seeds, etc., with equipment and not disturb the aggregates?
We're going to talk about that one soon. Yep. So cover cropping is one way to keep the living root year round. And again, that's to feed the organisms year round. Ultimately the goal would be to always have something growing. Because if you, and I've worked with farmers in the Willamette Valley, and they're like, if I don't have something growing, I am wasting sunlight, because there's energy falling on my farm that I am not capturing and either turning into building my soil or producing a crop. So in the Eastern Oregon, keeping a living root year-round in your range systems, obviously you're going to usually have something growing unless it's so degraded that you have a lot of bare space. But most of our perennial crops and farming systems over there have similar situations in which they're either doing row crops where they can try to grow a cover crop in there. I know in Ontario, when they had water issues where they didn't have as much water as they thought they'd get in their irrigation system, they grew some really cool cover crops because they knew they didn't want to leave these really sandy soils bare when winter was going to come and get windy. So they were growing millet and sorghum and some of these cool warm grasses. So there's ways across the state, even in the low precip zones. Garrett actually is probably working with one of the most innovative farmers in the Pacific Northwest, trying to find a cover crop system that's going to work for the Columbia Plateau's wheat fallow system, which that is like the holy grail of cover crop systems. How can we, with a 10 inches? 12-inch precip zone that we can only harvest every other year, get a cover crop in there? So I'm glad it's going to happen in my career. I got like 25 years left, so I'm going to see it, right? So the next one, which we'll probably speak about the aggregates, is disturbance. How do you minimize disturbance? And that's a really good question. So in agricultural, so this is kind of a garden setting, right? So this is if you were at your raised bed, or maybe your school has a little plot, or you can visit a local market gardener, someone who's like gardening an acre, half an acre, and then selling to a farmer's market. So what are the things they can do? Well, they can rototill, right? That's the most disruptive. But they also have other kinds of equipment called spaders. And it's all about understanding your equipment and the impact it's having on the soil when you run it. And I call it mindful tillage, knowing that every time you go out there with a tractor, a disc, or a fork, or a spader, or a plow, understand how it's impacting the soil. Are you at the right moisture content? That will really affect how disruptive the soil is if you're plowing or doing traction during a time where it's really, really moist. It'll just smear those those pores and destroy them. How deep is it set? If you're going through with a mechanical weeder, do you need to disturb 10 inches because you don't know how to adjust the bar on your tractor? Or can you figure out how to adjust the bar and only get those little weed roots when they're only at the top ½ inch and just disturb maybe the top, right? So it's all about being mindful. How deep do you go? How often? With what equipment? How much do you need to do? And understanding the limitations. And in these other agricultural systems, like bigger scale, you think of like 1,000-acre grass seed farms, you know, the least disturbing option is a no-till drill. And that is where they have a big tractor and then a big, huge, like a 90-foot boom or something like that, depending on, maybe it's a 30-foot drill. And then they have 2 discs on the back of it, and those discs are called coulters. And they slice the soil open, one little space. They drop a seed in, and then they drop a little fertilizer right next to it, and they kind of just drill in, and they can drill through cover, so you can roll down a cover crop and then drill through that. That's the least disturbing, but then you have something called a slug, right? And in the Western Oregon, slugs are a huge barrier to being able to do that because the slug will actually, in that little slice, it'll just go along in the canyon and eat the seed as it germinates. Oregon State University just hired Dr. Rory McDonnell, who is, I'm going to say it, probably the world's best slug researcher currently. Seriously, he's like done some amazing stuff in the UK, got markets and options available to UK farmers that aren't even available here yet, and we got them. So he's looking at how to address slug across agronomic systems in the Western Oregon, including cropland, nurseries, Christmas trees are all impacted by slugs.
I'm sorry, were you done with the slug?
Yes.
Okay, so I was going to say, another thing that we don't always talk about in our presentations on this aspect is you can decrease disturbance by rotating into a perennial crop, you know, like
Yes.
pasture or hay for a few years. That doesn't work on every farm, but where you can do it, you've got then, you know, several years of no disturbance.
Thank you, I should add that. But that's kind of the time and space too. So, you know, there's kind of a spectrum between the least disturbing no-till. So no-till on the Columbia Plateau is just what you do, right? You go out there and you see that wheat stubble. If you're driving to like Condon, that's the fallow year. They've left that stubble and then they drill into that to prevent the erosion. All the way, like vertical till's kind of a combo of those, and you have a disc, which is what we have a lot around here in the Willamette Valley. And then you still have moldboard plows, which are those, they'll turn the soil over. Other parts of the country, I have a colleague, he's retired from North Dakota, and he drove across from North Dakota to come out here and teach a soil health course for us one time. He stopped at every tractor dealership across North Dakota, and he's like, you could not find a plow on any lot. Everything was a drill, because there, in their climate, like everyone has just adopted it. You can't even buy a plow anymore. So when I drive down through the Willamette Valley and I see those beautifully moldboard plowed, it's like, oh, we're almost there, right? And tillage is a tool. So I'm not going to sit here and say, stop tilling, tilling is evil, because it's not. Sometimes if you got a really big infestation of a weed or something, get out there and take care of it, right? But just understand, if you do that action, there's consequences. So what am I going to do to balance that? Am I going to add an organic matter? Am I going to add a cover crop? How can I, in my farming system, you know, mitigate for the damage that is done by tilling? All right, did I go through all of them? I did. So those are the principles. What you want to do is think through them. The fifth principle I kind of mentioned is the livestock. So in northeastern Oregon, like think Enterprise, kind of, Wallowa Lake area, they have beautiful perennial systems where they have alfalfa and they might grow out into a cereal crop. And then what they've been doing, because there's a lot of cattle around there too, is when they have that breakout year, that alfalfa has kind of a thatch layer that develops after its fifth year. And so they're putting in cover crops. So they're putting these really diverse cover crop species, mixes that have, we call them tiller radishes. So radishes are like that big and that thick around. So they'll pop through that thatch. And then what they're doing is they're putting the cattle out there and they're getting winter gain on that cattle before they have to take them off and actually bring the feed to them. And the cattle with their hooves are actually churning and mixing up that thatch layer. And so incorporating that cover crop with that animal is making them a lot of money because they are not having to feed, and it's decreasing about 5 different tillage runs that they would have to do to break up that and get it ready to seed again. So really cool folks around the state are implementing these systems.
One thing that I'd like to add about
Yeah.
the livestock component, and whenever I talk about soil health principles, I nearly always talk about the livestock component now, primarily because I work on the east side, and the way that I think of it is that when you're talking about arid environments that are particularly have long dormant seasons, like summer and winter, where the soil biology isn't as active, the livestock, the ruminant animals, nature's way of providing that microbiological population all year round to facilitate nutrient cycling. So that's the way that I explain it, and it's probably not nearly as important in, say, like the Willamette Valley, where you've got the climate where the soil is active all year round, but particularly on like the east side, it's an important aspect.
Thank you, that's good info. So just for fun, because I know people are coming from a lot of different backgrounds across the state, how would you implement this in a perennial system like an orchard? Right, an orchard, you have tree rows and you have alleys between the trees. And that tree is not just getting nutrients and water from its 5-foot row, right? Its roots go all the way out into the alleys between it. So when you want to keep an orchard covered, you can cover crop between the rows or mulch in the tree rows. Again, you add diversity. This is a cherry orchard that Garrett's actually worked on, this producer with, and they have, and during orchard establishment, they are just like packing in those cover crops as diverse as possible, trying to build soil organic matter and the soil food web. And this guy actually was so convinced, he actually special custom ordered from Europe a no-till drill that will fit down his alleyways. So he can turn his cover crop over or plant different cover crops and not have to plow to do it. And then of course, with an orchard system, you have a year-round root, but how do you increase the diversity so that you're getting that year-round root all the way between this? If this hadn't been this, I think it's like, what, a 9 species mix?
There's a lot, probably more than that.
Yeah, it would just be annual rye, just like a lawn between them. In our vineyard systems around the state, when they harvest grapes, they only have to go down with equipment every other row. It's just how the machines work. And so that alternate row is an opportunity for a lot of people in those vineyards are putting in perennial cover crops to build biodiversity, pollinator habitat, and then building that soil system, because those grapes are going, grape roots will go past that root, to the next row. So they're pretty robust systems. Pasture, a lot of folks are coming from pasture systems. How do you implement these operations in pastures? A lot of times when it comes to livestock, it's about utilization. So you want to keep it covered. You want proper utilization, the right amount of animals out there at the right time, so you're keeping the cover that you have, preventing erosion. Depending on the animal that you have different things you need to think about as far as diversity. A horse is going to want a different suite of diverse plants out there than a cow, because too much of one thing was going to affect a horse's health versus different grazing animals. When you want to minimize disturbance in a livestock area, you want to think about distribution. Do you have sacrifice or concentration areas? We call them heavy use areas. They might be by the watering troughs or by the barn or the places where they get onto the trucks. You want to create those concentration areas and then manage them so they don't spread out. And you want to rotate, obviously you want to do a lot of seasonal and rotational grazing, and you want to have the animals out when the soil is strong enough for them to reduce that hoof shear when they're actually sinking in and just shearing the soil and smearing those pores. And of course, proper utilization is going to give you a living root year round. All right, I'm close to being done. So, any questions? Oh, this is my favorite part. What is the number one factor determining the health and the function of soil? People! All of those things that I started with, the chemical and physical properties, those are inherent soil properties. You get what you buy. All right? You get that texture. You get that chemistry. You get that, mineralogy. You can't change that. But the function and the biology of soil, those are dynamic soil properties. Those are completely contingent on management. That is why the NRCS, when they started soil survey 100 plus years ago, only made chemical and physical property maps. If you go to soil survey, you're only going to get the chemical and physical properties because you can't make a map of something where you walk 10 feet and it changes because you crossed a fence row, right? So people are the number one driver of how well soils are functioning. And that, to me, is one of the most hopeful statements we can say, right? Because we are in control of our destiny, right? As land managers, as gardeners, as folks who have the opportunity with your students to influence and make decisions about how land should be managed when you're going through these Leviathan talks, it really, truly is the people and their choices that can make the difference for how your soil functions and how you would get all those things you want soil to do. So how do you do that? Well, how do you get these four things? You don't try everything at once. You don't go from being a 1,000-acre grass seed, conventional grass seed farmer and wake up and after, of course, hearing me talk for an hour, right, and decide to change your life philosophy and do a soil function system. No, you start small, right? You take a little piece and you say, okay, well, I got a perennial system so I can keep my ground covered. But it's, it's kind of a monoculture, so I got to try things to build diversity in there. I've got a living root, but maybe part of the time it's covered, it's not alive anymore, right? And disturbance, there's no way I can get rid of my plow yet. So how do you start to do this? You just think about ways in which, with your scale and the management of your system, you can find those gaps where there's space for these different principles. So maybe you are in a row crop system in the Willamette Valley and you want to incorporate a cover crop. You don't know how you're going to do it with corn because you harvest corn late, but I harvested my peas early. I can figure out a way to start getting a cover crop after my peas. But I'm not quite there yet on my corn. Right now I've just let my corn stubble over winter. And it's those small steps, and there are wonderful examples across the state of farmers and managers who have found ways to incorporate these soil health principles into their strategies because it has become part of the agricultural dialogue in our country right now. I can honestly say that. Trade magazines, the federal assistance agencies, NRCS, people are talking about ways in which we can get folks, encourage them to offset the risk of trying these things to make these soil management systems. All right. So if you're a farmer, this is where your cheerleader would happen. Every step is worth it. The biology is there. You don't have to buy bugs in a jug. There's no single recipe for success. And that's the other takeaway, is that every system is going to be different. And so everyone as a producer is going to have to look individually at their system and their constraints, time, capital, equipment, soil, those inherent soil properties, to find the way that they're going to be able to think of ways to incorporate these management strategies. All right. Lots of resources. This is the book I mentioned, Building Soils for Better Crops. If you Google NRCS Soil Health, you get this fantastic website that has 3 seasons of about 5 to 10, 2 to 3 minute YouTube videos of principles of soil health, and this one guy going around the country interviewing people who are doing active research in soil health. These are great things for the classroom. I encourage my peers on Friday afternoons at lunch to just start, I'm bored, I can't think about that spreadsheet anymore, right? Go watch a couple soil health YouTube videos. We have profiles of landowners across Oregon on our website who are actively implementing soil health strategies, and from why they did it to the gains that they saw from it and how they'll keep doing it. There's tons of handouts out there, fact sheets, all that kind of stuff. All right, that's it. That's me. Any questions? This one totally stayed together.